Welcome to this BPT video. My name's Kieran Doe. I'm a senior tutor at ACA Masters and multiple ICAEW prize winner. In this video, I'll be offering my advice on what you should do to prepare for your BPT exam and what you should do when you are in your BPT exam. So first of all, in terms of preparation in the build-up to your BPT exam, so BPT is a vast syllabus, certainly the largest at professional level, and it's therefore important that you break it down into more manageable areas. Otherwise, you'll just find it overwhelming and you won't be able to absorb any of the key information at all. So the way I suggest you break it down is firstly by tax. So first of all, personal taxes. So break it down, income tax, CGT and IHT, and then break it down into those individual topics like income tax, break it down into employment, into self-employment, and then the niche areas like pensions and international aspects. And you can do the same with all of the main areas. So CGT, reliefs as a subtopic, international aspects as another subtopic there, and corporation tax you can do in the same way. So like losses and groups as one area, international structure as another area, PE incorporation, etc. And this will make BPT much more manageable. So as well as the individual taxes and subtopics within those taxes, I suggest you also have some time allocated to the common exam scenarios of starting a business, closed companies, buying a business, exiting a business. So whilst these don't have, or generally don't have, new technical content, and they're taking on or combining the technical content from the earlier parts, these are very common exam scenarios, and therefore it's worth focusing on that specific scenario and what is going on. So what you want to do for each topic area or question type is make sure you've understood the technical content and then work through questions on it so you can see how it's examined and you can start to work on your exam technique. And by breaking it down like this, it makes it much more manageable. So what you therefore need to do is to create a study plan to ensure that you cover each topic. So this will be very personal to you, but to give you an example, here we've got obviously the days of the week and various time slots, and obviously this will depend heavily on your own personal routine and your work schedule. But if we assume here, you're working between 9 and 5:30 and you have an hour for lunch, for example, then you can kind of see, Monday to Friday will be blocked out with work. You have your lunch break as well. But then you can see that you'd have some free time probably before work, a bit of time at lunch, and then probably most of your time after work and on the weekends. So what I always did was I would kind of allocate my compulsory time first of all, obviously work, you're going to be at work on those times, and then obviously your main leisure activities, because it's important that you continue to look after yourself and keep yourself in a good mental state in the build up to the exam. So for me personally, I like to exercise regularly, so I'd allocate some time to the gym and then have some relaxing time in the evening. So therefore I'd allocate that time, and then that would leave you with kind of your study slots. So like I said, it would depend on how your week is structured as to what your study slots are. But then I would start allocating the topics to each study slot. So this would also depend on how many exams you're sitting. If you're sitting other exams at the same time, then obviously you're going to need to allocate topics for both exams or all three exams into these various slots. But to give you an idea of how you could make this work, once we've gone back to the topics, you could start with employment and go over the technical content. So you could watch the video on it. So in the videos from our video course, I teach the technical content, and then immediately after work through some questions so you can see how to apply that content to the exam questions. So then after you've watched that and you've understood that key technical content and how to apply it to exam questions, your next study slot, you can go and practice those questions. So you could go and practice some questions, on employment. So during the class, I'll explain the key technical content around employment and income tax, share options and terminations being the key new areas in the BPT exam. So I'll explain that content. I'll then work through some exam questions so you can see how to apply that content in the exam and the exam technique to use for BPT. And then, on your next study slot, you can then go and practice some questions on that. So if you go to the master plan at the end of the income tax section, then you can see that the questions on each topic, so you could go away and practice some of the other questions on share schemes and termination. So you can see that this will just kind of enable you to master that one topic, and then the next time you could work on the next topic. So employment intermediaries, for example. So again, you could watch the video in your next study slot, and then the one after that, practice the questions. But it would work in exactly the same way as we've just seen there. So during a video class, I'll explain the key technical areas in a nice, easy to understand way. So you'll understand the technical content and how it applies and where it applies. And then, of course, you can go and practice the other intermediary questions after that. And then you can just go through all of the topics one by one, understand the technical content, and then work on some questions. So whether that's at lunchtime, a bit before work, or sometime after work, you can see that even when you've got these small little windows of study time, you can make better use of those when you've broken it down like this. Because to do like a question, like a subpart of a question on something like pensions or share schemes, doesn't take very long at all. You could quite easily do that part of the question, within 20 minutes, half an hour, and then debrief the answer to see which points you got and which areas you need to go back and work on. So this approach has several advantages, but one of which it enables you to maximize the use of your study time. And therefore you can do this with all of the topics. But like I said, if you're also sitting other exams, you'll need to allocate time in for those as well. There probably wouldn't be too much overlap with the other exams unless, of course, you are sitting TC. So then I would keep breaking it down into individual topics and just go through and master them all one by one. So then move on through all the CGT, IHT topics, and then the corporation tax, and then the common exam scenarios, which draw on the technical content from the earlier parts, but in a specific scenario, specific kind of commercial or typical scenario that comes up regularly in the exam and, of course, in real life. But of course, as you get closer to the exam, probably about 2 to 4 weeks before the exam, you want to start sitting full exam papers, marking your answers and identifying which areas you've done well on and which areas you haven't done well on. So therefore, you know which topics to come back and revisit as a priority. So by doing that, you'd have gone through and covered all of the topics, practiced lots of questions, understood the technical content, and you'd have done full exams, and then focus on your weak areas, and therefore you should be ready for the real exam. So what you should do in the exam itself, and this also applies to your question practice as well, because your question practice should be a full kind of dress rehearsal of the exam. You should do your questions in the software, try to do them to time, particularly as you get closer and closer to the exam. Use your open book notes as you would in the real exam. So this equally applies to when you're practicing questions before the exam and when you are in the exam. So what's very important is that you allocate your time so that you attempt every question. So in the BPT exams, you won't have the marks split by each sub-requirement. So you need to estimate the allocation yourself so that you know how many marks roughly for each sub-requirement, and therefore how much time you should spend on each sub-requirement. And I'll demonstrate this a lot in the video classes, so you can see how I do it, so you can see how to get an approximation of how many marks there are for each part, and therefore how long you should spend on each part of the question. Now, the reason that's really important is because that will enable you to get the easy marks on every question. So if you think about it like this, each question, each requirement will generally have some easy marks, some medium marks, and some hard marks. So obviously a good exam strategy is to make sure you attempt every part and get the easy and the medium marks. Don't spend all your time here trying to get everything exactly correct so that you run out of time and you don't answer these parts, because those final points you're trying to get here are likely to be very hard marks, very technical, possibly kind of niche areas, whereas actually there'll be some easy and medium marks here. Now, I'm not saying ethics is always easy, but there always are some very easy marks in there, and there's a lot of headroom marks as well. So you definitely want to make sure you move on time to get the ethics part. So therefore, you want to make sure you attempt every part of the question. This bit on losses in groups is probably some really fiddly, highly technical bits. So therefore, there'll probably be a couple of bits that you don't answer, but that doesn't matter because there's headroom marks. So you could, in theory, still get full marks even without getting everything correct. And instead, you should move on and make sure you get onto this part of the question where you can get some nice easy marks between explaining the difference between an overseas subsidiary and a permanent establishment, something that you'll be very well rehearsed on after practicing questions on that common exam scenario. So therefore, you have to be quite savvy in terms of your time allocation in the exam to make sure you grab all of that low-hanging fruit. So another important thing to do is appreciate that this is like a multi-tax exam. So in most questions, there will be several taxes which are relevant, and therefore you want to make sure that you cover all of the relevant taxes. And if there's multiple issues, like there sometimes are, advised on the issues below, and there's 4 or 5 issues, you want to make sure you cover all of them as well. And actually, it's really the same principle of what I've just explained, that if you've got a question and it asks you to explain the capital tax consequences of a series of transactions, or the capital tax consequences of each alternative, then you want to make sure you cover CGT and IHT. If you only cover one of them, you're going to severely limit your marks. And also, there'll be some very hard CGT points and some very hard IHT points. But what you want to do is cover CGT and IHT, get the easy and the medium marks for both, and that's going to really help you rack up your marks in the exam. And then again, if there's 2 alternatives like we have here, or several issues, then you can again see here that if you cover both of them and get the easy and the medium marks on both, then you're going to rack up marks very quickly. Whereas if you only answer alternative 1, you're going to severely limit the marks that you get. So in terms of your writing style, you want to make sure that you're short, concise, and get down as many points as possible. So when you look at the ICAEW answers, they're really useful in terms of giving you a comprehensive explanation of the technical areas and the technical points. However, you can't produce those in the exam. Even if you can speed type, you can't actually think that quickly to be able to get that volume of content down. So what you need is a writing style which is short and concise, which enables you to cover all of the issues. So you can see, you get straight to the point. You can see this in my model answers, and you'll see it in the videos when I work through questions. But short, concise range of points, covering all of the different issues, relevant part of the tax rules, apply it to the scenario, calculate the numbers where you can. Make sure that you cover all of the issues so you get the easy and the medium parts, the easy and the medium marks on each. You can kind of see here, capital tax planning type question. You can see covering life transfer and death transfer, the 2 alternatives, covering CGT and IHT, short, concise range of points, making sure I get through as much as possible, giving our recommendations where required. So you can see, this exam technique will enable you to rack up the marks, because if you can write these points quickly and concisely, that gives you more time to make more points. Whereas if you write this point in a long drawn out paragraph and it took 3 times as long, then clearly you're going to be getting less marks overall across the paper. And then, as I've said, in terms of covering their taxes, you can think of all of the relevant taxes which are in the BPT exam and almost kind of cross them off on your head. If you could think, is corporation tax relevant? Is income tax relevant? You could think of it like that, but certainly be on the lookout for VAT, stamp duty, and national insurance. They're quite small taxes. The technical content isn't as substantial and doesn't evolve that much from TC, but they're quite easy to miss. Unlike TC, you're not going to get a question where it says calculate the stamp duty and VAT. It's going to be embedded into a bigger question, quite often these common exam scenarios. So whilst the points you make to get the marks are quite straightforward, it's actually identifying that they're relevant can sometimes be the hardest bit. So having a good set of notes will really help you here, because you can have little reminders that if you're looking at starting a business, for example, you could go through, the main issues are going to be, income tax or corporation tax, and then tax on the extraction of the profits. But then there'll also be, VAT and stamp duty considerations as well. For example, if it was like a residential property letting business, or with an incorporation, for example, the main focus is going to be, are there trading losses? How are they going to be relieved on cessation of the unincorporated business? Then capital gains on disposal of the assets, claiming corporation relief or don't claim it to get BADR. There's going to be a lot of consideration there. But actually, bringing in VAT and stamp duty will get you quite a few more marks, and it should be relatively straightforward. In most cases, it'll be a transfer of going concern, so there'll be some nice easy marks there. And even saying a new accounting period starts with corporation tax, again, a nice easy mark there. So make sure you cover the full range of taxes, the full range of issues, and the best way to have the capacity to do this is have a short, concise writing style, so you can get more points down in the time. So the questions, as I've said, have headroom marks, so you don't need to get the hard marks. So therefore, get through all of the issues and you'll pick up the easy marks. So of course, the fact it's an open book exam is great, because you've got something to kind of fall back on if you need to look up a niche technical area like company repurchase of shares, for example, or when you've got common exam scenarios like incorporation and you've got a list of points to consider including. Certainly not copy out. It's so crucial that you apply it to the specific scenario, but a reminder of the technical points to consider including in your answer. So selling a business and buying a business, some of these points will be relevant, but SBAs are relevant if there's buildings in the company. Intangibles points are relevant if there's intangible assets in the company. So always make sure you're applying it to the specific scenario. And these are particularly useful for these common exam scenarios, exiting a business or buying a business, for example. And they're also very useful for niche areas where there's specific technical calculations, maybe some of the share schemes, share option schemes, company repurchase of shares, for example, capital goods scheme adjustment for VAT. So make sure that you've got a good set of open book notes, which are going to help you save time in the exam, but you need to make sure they're not too detailed, not too cumbersome, because you're under time pressure. So you need to be able to identify the point quickly and then think about how you develop a point specific to the scenario. So don't let your notes you bring in become too big. Make sure they're concise, make sure they're effective, so you can use them quickly in the exam when answering exam questions. And you'll see me using these as I work through questions. So another important point to appreciate when you're reading through the scenario, make sure you identify exactly what is going on in the scenario. So there can often be some confusion amongst students about when a company is involved and how it is then taxed, or thinking that somehow individuals own the assets of the company. So for example, where we've got a company which is disposing of its trade and assets, then obviously it's going to have like chargeable gains on land and buildings, intangible fixed asset, profit or loss on disposal of the intangibles, capital allowance adjustments on capital allowance items. But these are the company's assets. You'll be told in the question, it's a limited company, company owns the assets, company's been trading, all the individual owns is the shares in the company. So therefore, if the company sells its assets, the company will be paying corporation tax on any gains and profits and losses when it ceases to trade. So it's a company that would be paying corporation tax here, and then what would be left in the company is all of the cash, and then that cash would be paid up to the individual, possibly as a dividend or possibly as a post-liquidation receipt, meaning it's a gain, and therefore the individual would pay effectively a gain on their shares or income tax on a dividend that they've received. However, sometimes students misunderstand the question or fundamentally misunderstand how tax rules apply, and they think that the individual is selling the assets and the individual is going to have capital gains on all of the individual assets. So they're like fundamentally misinterpret the scenario. They misinterpret what is going on in the specific scenario, or they haven't quite grasped this during their learning phase. So it's really important that you kind of understand conceptually what's going on in questions and in common scenarios. So it's important that you really understand conceptually the difference between an unincorporated business where the individual owns the assets personally and an incorporated business where the company owns the assets. All the individual owns is the shares in the company. Another example of this would be when setting up a business overseas. It can either be set up as a permanent establishment, which is still part of the company, or they can set up a separate company, an overseas subsidiary. And during the video course, I'll clarify all of this for you and make it very easy to understand. And this will really help you during your whole study phase, because you'll start to see the similarities between topics, like the similarities between a liquidation and a sale of a trade in assets, and you'll realize that when somebody's exiting a business and they sell the trade in assets or they liquidate the company, these are very similar in terms of the steps that you'll go through. So as well as understanding the technical content, it's very important to kind of appreciate the big picture here. And whether this is in your preparation or when you're in the exam, it's really important to understand the specific facts in the scenario as to who owns what and who is disposing what to who, and therefore which taxes apply. Is it an individual disposing of assets or is it a company disposing of assets? And therefore, are you thinking about business asset disposal relief, or if it's a company disposing of assets, are we thinking kind of SSE and rollover relief? So it's really important that you kind of understand conceptually and practically what is going on. We'll see a lot of this during the classes. So hopefully that's given you some useful advice in terms of how to structure your preparation for BPT. So breaking it down by individual topic, making it into more manageable chunks, understand the technical content, how to answer the questions, and then go and practice questions yourself so that you can go through and just master it one topic at a time. And then in terms of your technique in the exam, then just make sure that you allocate your time to each subpart of the question so that you answer all parts of the question. Make sure that you understand conceptually what is going on in the question so that you can identify the relevant taxes and apply them correctly, and don't make fundamental misunderstandings like thinking that SSE can apply to individuals or companies can claim business asset disposal relief, because that, of course, will certainly frustrate the examiner. But allocate your time to each topic. Make sure that you answer all parts of the question so you can get the easy marks on each, and then make sure you've got a useful set of notes which you've got a lot of practice, or you've had a lot of practice with, so that you become really efficient at using them in the exam. So in terms of other resources we have, if you go to the BPT page of the ACA Masters website, we have our video course available, which is the structure I've been referring to here. So it covers all of the key technical areas, explains the technical content in a nice, easy to understand way. and I work through questions so you can see the exam technique to use. So we do have some free sample classes available, so you can go and watch those, and therefore you can see me demonstrate what I mean when I talk about this exam technique, when I talk about how to interpret the scenario correctly. It's obviously best to see this practically demonstrated. So we've got corporation tax class, a CGT, IHT, trust, FIC type class, and also a common exam scenario of starting a business. So a real good mix there of questions for you to see me demonstrate this exam technique, and I'll demonstrate how you should answer the question from start to finish. Then we've also got our BPT open book notes, which you've seen me refer to there. So they're available as well on our website. But you can see how you should structure your notes so that they're a nice, effective, short and effective set of notes for you to use in the exam when you are answering questions. I often post tips and advice on my LinkedIn page, so feel free to connect with me on there. There's also the company LinkedIn page as well, ACA Masters, also posting exam tips on there as well. There's a blog page on the ACA Masters website where we've got some useful articles on there, so you can go and have a look at the BPT blog on there, which has got some more useful advice there on BPT. And then we also have the ACA Masters YouTube channel as well, where there are BPT videos and videos for the other subjects as well. So some other useful resources there for you to work with. So thanks very much for watching this video. I hope you found that useful to give you some guidance in terms of how you should be preparing for your BPT exam. And I look forward to getting you through your BPT exam with top marks.